Hello, and welcome to Cultivate and Collaborate, where we sit down with global leaders across agriculture and food and talk about leadership, problem solving, and how to create partnerships that move our industry forward. We're excited to share trends in agri-food software and data, along with growing opportunities for innovation across the entire supply chain. It's all right here on Cultivate and Collaborate. Thank you for listening, and don't forget to subscribe.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to the next edition of Cultivate and Collaborate. Today, we're at the Fuel Ethanol Workshop here in St. Louis, Missouri, and we are talking to a number of experts about how the ethanol industry and all of the changes in that space are affecting how agriculture is going to look in the future. Let's start with a few introductions. If you guys want to start, and then we'll jump into some questions.
Yeah, so Jeff, appreciate you having us. My name is Clay Sellmeyer with Verdova. I'm the Chief Operating Officer in business development. Have a background in input, production, agriculture, basic manufacturer side. Live in Central Illinois.
Yeah, great to have you.
Jeff and Jay, my name's Andy Jenks. Actually live about 3 hours north here in Western Illinois. A sixth generation farmer, but also founder of Verdova, a data company we'll talk about here a little bit. But yeah, thanks for having us join.
Andy, good to have you here. Jay?
Jay Weber. I've been with Cultura since the end of last year. Been in agriculture my whole life. Was a trader for just over a dozen years, but been on the technology side since roughly 2018. Thanks for having me.
And I'm Jeff Schreiner. I guess my background would be in agriculture for a long time. Grew up on a farm in small town Nebraska, Douglas, Nebraska, and have been in technology now for the better part of the last 30 years in various parts of the supply chain, the trading side, the CPG side, and production side, and the milling side. Look forward to this topic because I think it's very relevant that both we've got the right players to talk about this topic and also that we're here at the Fuel Ethanol Workshop. I'm going to start, Jay, with you. When you look at the ethanol value chain, what stands out as the biggest reason for collaboration and why is it essential?
Yeah, I think this is long overdue in the ag space in general, is people working together. I think there's a lot of opportunity with just pulling the right data together. A lot of people can capture a lot of different pieces of data, but the question is it monetizable? The one thing I think in the 45Z space or LCFS you got to think about is regulations are important, but ultimately the buyer is really dictating what's needed, and especially in what format. The data that we provide, we've got to actually pass through different verifiers and law firms, and they don't want to look at data all in different types of ways. So more that we can standardize that delivery to the buyer side, to me, that's a big thing we can provide.
Andy, I'm going to turn to you next. What challenges in low carbon fuel development simply can't be solved without coordination across producers, the technology providers, regulators, and all of the downstream partners?
Yeah, great question. And I'll try to hit on, really all four of those. But I would say, really at the outset, one of the biggest challenge bringing everybody together is really trust. Everyone agrees low carbon fuels are important, but markets require confidence that the environmental claims that we're all making are accurate, verifiable. That means data has to move across, organizations, has to move from farmer system all the way through to the end user. That's all got to be verifiable. And really no single company can establish an industry-wide trust by itself. It requires alignment, standards, and verification and reporting. And honestly, the collaboration is what's needed in this to succeed. So let's kind of rewind in that where we talk about, producers, technology providers, regulators. They've all got to be on the same page. And we've got to really come in and make sure we really hit the, for lack of a better term, an easy button for all of them to make sure it's a clean all the way across to the finish line. And that's really what we're trying to do is create downstream value at the end that is clean and verifiable, auditable at the end of the game.
Mm-hmm. It's a long time coming.
Long time coming. And I tell you what, let me put my farmer hat on for a second. this has been a long time coming, a long time needed. And this is needed in our industry right now. You talk to farmers across, all the Midwest, every state, a lot of red ink on balance sheets. Guys aren't making money. This is an injection that's needed for our industry right now. And, it's time for us to kind of, stop talking about it and get it across the finish line so we can actually bring dollars back into the communities that need it.
So Jeff, I think I have a question for you. So when you think about the CFCC and bringing different organizations together, you obviously saw pretty early there was a need for it, and it's not easy to do. So I guess from your standpoint, what's the reason you brought these companies together to try to provide a solution in such a complex marketplace?
I'll say two factors. One was we listened to our customers, and we found that no one customer voiced their problem in a way that made it sound like you could make a single solution to solve that problem. There is issues all the way along the supply chain where you don't understand where the beginnings of where the sustainable fuel feedstock are produced and what requirements are there. That's one part of the problem. Two, you need to understand that that product moves, and it has to have and it has to transition the data from the place where it was produced to where it's actually going to be processed into ethanol. All of those are handoffs that actually need to satisfy the regulation. Then there's auditors, there's regulators, and all of those folks involved are actually the biggest part of the problem. So what we saw originally when we interacted with customers and people who are really familiar with the industry was that if you could bring a set of these folks together, and if you could voice the actual outcome that everyone was expecting, you'd get people that would line up and actually fulfill the problem. So our ultimate goal was to make it as streamlined as possible by bringing folks together that had a common interest and actually have everyone reiterate what the problem is that they're trying to solve and then to line up on that singular mission. We didn't have the right partners at the beginning. We had a really good, healthy set of discussions, but we found that over time, we'd reached out to the Verdovas of the world because they have a very distinct relationship with a part of the supply chain that uniquely they had. We had to reach out with folks that were actually on the buyers of the credit side. So the buyers of the credit also drive a lot of the standards. We had to have regulatory partners that stood in next to us and say, this is the way we think it's going to be transacted. And then ultimately, the ethanol producers in each of the companies have their own roles. Each of those roles have to be transitioned from the process that they work in today to the process that they work in the future. So by bringing different groups together and saying we're all going to align around a common outcome, it helped us to work towards that outcome as a group. Everyone still had their own mission, but the outcomes were the same.
So that explains a lot of why. I've really been fascinated. This isn't the first time you've brought groups together, especially groups that compete in the marketplace. So I guess, how do you convince a group to get together to align on a shared outcome that typically compete in the marketplace every day?
Yeah, my perspective on why you get folks that are seemingly competitors together, why do they do that? Well, in agriculture, it's unique. You always have co-opetition happening everywhere. You've got folks that have to compete and they have to be partners at the same time because the value chain demands that that's the way it works. So, if you frame this up in the same way that the industry works, it's not quite as difficult a stretch to say, yeah, you may compete on a lot of fronts, but ultimately, if one of you falls down, everyone falls down, and you have to deliver on that promise that you make to the ultimate customers. And we don't see it just in the fuel side. We see it in the feed side. You see it in the food production side, growing even more now, where you have consumers that are demanding a whole bunch of new requirements that are going to come into the mix. My belief is that the more of that commonality, that common mission happens in the industry, the better off we're going to be. And it has happened in other industries too. Okay, I'm going to ask Clay you a question about how data actually works in this space. Ethanol producers, transporters, and buyers all handle their data a little bit differently. How did the consortium approach really create some standards or reveal what interoperability really needs it to look like?
Yeah, Jeff, I think it's a critical question and ultimately certainly still a unique problem that is being solved. I think in some cases very fragmented and siloed. If you think about what we're trying to accomplish or what the guidance would tell us we're kind of going after in the Z space, or let's say the new requirements in LCFS or Canada or ISCC. At the end of the day, you've got to take very regimented, culture-driven organizations who've frequently been able to have successful business models for years that have never had to have something that everybody can touch and feel and be aligned to. And then you add the grower piece to it. At the end of the day, the farmer that produces the feedstock that gets ground, or to your earlier cases, goes into feed or food. From the farm side, this is kind of a cyclical change for the farmer and their first point of origination. And that first point of origination might still be the biofuel plant, but the requirements are going to change when you show up at the scale. And, the interoperability of all that and I think, Jay, you mentioned this earlier, and you had a good phrase, Jeff, cooperation, the ability to get alignment, and at the end of the day, the true collaboration that's going to be needed to pull this off from the farmer to the first point of origination, to the processor, to the buyer, and all the other people have to touch that in between to have this successfully get through and to drive the most value off of that, qualified sale is going to be really important. But, from the consortium standpoint, you can have data. We have plenty of data in ag, and that's been the challenge in ag the last several years. We have all this data. We have a slide of Verdova that shows all the places that create data in ag. We probably don't have all of them listed, but it's a very font light, image heavy, small text on one presentation. And it's amazing the amount of places that are creating data that's hard to ingest or utilize outside of that one environment. So having that operability to pull the pertinent events or applications that produce that feedstock from the farmer through the entire value chain, you've got to drive some standards, because you can't show up to a buyer or an institutional, opportunity. And I think Jay said it best. They're expecting some level of standardization. And I think ultimately that's what the CFCC is really trying to drive for, particularly in the biofuel space.
Clay, given those outcomes, one thing that comes to mind is integrity of that data.
Good point.
You don't want to see any gamesmanship. You definitely don't want to see somebody play game, try to muddy the waters with not clean data. How do you see that coming into play so that that problem doesn't manifest itself?
Yeah, it's a really important point, Jeff. There's today or 10 years ago, you can walk into your local FSA office as a farm operation or participate in an NRCS equip type program, and you need certain data points. And the gamesmanship, I would say, typically ends or should end before you walk in the door. You should have your stuff together, know which practices you've got to do, have the accountability, and be able to backstop the ultimate filing of whatever that program is. In this case, there's going to be that many more people involved. As we have all mentioned, the amount of people that have to literally touch that piece of information throughout the entire value chain, you're going to have inherent trust built in. Certainly data privacy. 20 years ago, most growers that I ever interacted with in my past, they kept their data, quote unquote, their data really close to their vest. They didn't want to share it. They didn't want to see their neighbor have it. They didn't want to see their ag retailer have it, or anybody that, God forbid, could use it against them. Well, that's a great case scenario that's really alive today, because it can't be used against them because it's very fragmented data. And until it's combined, really doesn't have a whole lot of value unless the guy behind or the operation behind that data really understood what it was about. So in this case, moving forward, the trust around data privacy, what's going to happen to the data after this one transaction goes through, that's just a seasonal issue. The next season starts a new cycle, and how all these pieces have to come together with that inherent trust built in of all the people and ultimately that value chain that's going to consume part of the biofuel plant's data, the farmer's data, the auditor's data, the legal data, the buyer's data. there's a whole lot of different players in the room now that largely in the past have never been.
All good points.
So I had another quick question for you, Jeff. We're talking about all the data that needs to be brought together. So, as you think about how the grain flows and who touches the grain, some of the versions of the regulations had talked about first point of origination. And, what's your thoughts on bringing in the commercial side? A lot of people seem to have forgot about the commercial side needs to be involved in this whole thing.
So I think that came out in our customer conversations too, where you realize that if you look at how traceability has to play a factor in this, it doesn't just always go from one origin to one destination, and actually does sometimes touch multiple origin destinations to get to the final answer. Well, your commercial retailers play a big role in a significant way to all of the ethanol producers. Many of them rely on their commercials for stability. They rely on them for consistency, and that has been a part of our industry and will remain a part of our industry for a long time. That was an overlooked part of the regulation, and it may still be an overlooked part of the regulation where the commercial retailer has not been given as much priority and understanding as what you would see in the folks that are here at FEW. That a lot of them are producers, ethanol producers. The commercials, I think, are now starting to realize, because the pressure's on, that they have the same obligations. They're originators. They have the same obligations as the originators that may sit in some of the plants. And so I think that's one of the key evolutions that we found kind of early on when we were interviewing the different groups and saying, where does all your feedstock come from? And they would say, well, I get most of it from this one pathway. And then we'd go to that pathway, which was a commercial retailer, and ask them, and they would say, well, I haven't been thinking about it this way. There's a lot of build out of where that data needs to come from is not really considered in the regulation yet, but it should.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think the commercial retailer has a lot of opportunity. I know you said obligation, but I think of it as opportunity for the commercial retailer, because I think they could, expand their footprint if they want to get with this program and maybe originate some more bushels for some ethanol plants out there. So thanks for answering that.
Andy, I've got a question for you. Given all of this change in this, especially in fuel production, what benefits do you think the ethanol plants and farmers ultimately gain from this approach where they have to collaborate and generate this value?
Yeah, good question. And I may actually add in the commercial also. That everybody's going to ultimately gain from this, right? Again, as a farmer, I can't store 100% of my grain. Some of it still goes to a commercial elevator. So again, great points you guys made about the commercial's involvement in this and importance in not only transacting on the data from their systems, but also being able to have a piece in this. I think it's an important piece. So, but for ethanol producers and farmers, a collaborative approach, clean fuel credit generation that creates value is needed. Farmers gain recognition and potential compensation for implementing practices that we all have, whether it's no-till, whether it's cover crops, whether it's a nitrogen reduction or an inhibitor. There's going to be practices that growers benefit from. Now, on the other end of that, the ethanol producers, they're going to have to collect all that data. They're going to need a data provider like Verdova to bring all that data into one system. And it is, it's a dirty job. Mike Rowe should have it as one of the dirty jobs, because farm data is fragmented. It lives in 15 different systems. A grower may have one field named 4 different ways. So it's not easy, but it's necessary. It's necessary to clean this up, to get it to an audit-ready place. So again, great opportunity that we all have here to collaborate for the industry. It's been needed. But again, going back to it, I think from an ethanol plant, from a commercial, from a farmer, let's figure out a way to work together in this. I think there are some in the industry that have pitted the ethanol producer and the farmer against each other to understand, hey, here's the ultimate value. We both don't want to end up with zero in this. We both got to win. Same thing with commercial. There's got to be something in it for them. And so again, exciting times for the industry. Exciting times in a time that I hit on earlier in one of the earlier conversations. Exciting times in a needed time, right? The growers really need this to come to fruition. So yeah, great question. And again, thanks for having me on this.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the opportunity is getting understood, but it's not quite there. One of the questions I might follow up with your explanation as a farmer, do you think these pushes help sustainability programs? Do they help inspire the changes and more of a, in the whole face of the farm, in our entire farmer base? Is this type of move something that's going to push that or not?
As a farmer, we're always looking. So we're always looking to create more sustainable practices to, for the next generation. We're, at our core, we want to conserve the land, do the best thing for the land, right? At the same time, we want to be profitable. So, there's that balancing act, right? And not every piece of ground can be treated equal to get the correct outcome. But as you add sustainable practices, whether it's minimizing tillage or nitrogen, and there's a value creation there, that's going to encourage some sort of practice move, some sort of that it may make sense. And the other thing that makes it maybe a little easier to do is some of this equipment's getting more and more expensive. Fuel is getting more and more expensive. So there are moves as a farmer we have to do to not only create value from a premium standpoint, whether it's 45Z, but also to protect their bottom line. So again, I think anytime there's some sort of value added for like a practice change, or whether it's going to create movement in that direction.
One thing I would add, this isn't a new model. In ag, particularly the last several years, there's been opportunities for a farm operation to go chase a carrot, and they have to make adjustments, and they have to quantify what that impact is to their operation or their historic cultural practices. And oftentimes, to Andy's point, they make it in a pretty profitable commodity market. $6+ corn, fuel being cheaper. Some of those are like, well, there's a different risk reward at that point in time. Can they still raise 260 bushel corn and 80 bushel beans if they adjust the way that their dad farmed? Do they adjust the way they've always farmed, or the equipment they have that's sitting there not being used now? So everything's got to be justified. As commodity prices come down, as opportunities, I think, in the supply shed, back to the commercials, the fascinating thing I've seen in this biofuel space the last 3 or 4 years is actually how large some of the supply sheds are. You drive by on an interstate and you pass an ethanol plant, you see the stack from, 10 miles away. One would judge that most of that grain probably comes within eyesight, 20, 30-mile radius. In fact, what I've learned is the radius is quite large for a number of these supply sheds where they're drawing grain from. It tells me one of two things. There's some really good relationships that make somebody truck an hour and a half away, or there's a number of growers who've never thought, hey, maybe I could start taking my grain to that ethanol plant, or their supplier that they deliver their grain to out of the field in the fall isn't hooked up. I think those are the dynamics that, for a positive change, could influence some supply shed changes, commercial elevators being involved, ethanol plants being very proactive. Again, it's the rural community isn't just, the literal rural community. It actually could be a regional impact. But until some opportunities come along that kind of create the ignition, you got to have, that spark plug, kind of mentality that creates the opportunities really to develop themselves for other cases. And a fuel, in this particular case, or ethanol, really could be a game changer, because a lot of these markets, there's other alternatives other than biofuel. They could go to a river or something. They could go to a rail with something that might, in fact, command some of that same type of data, or those attributes they're looking for off the farm deeper than they have the past several years. If we've got a good pathway that's collaborative, and you've got the trust in the data, and the number of stakeholders are going to have to be involved, then that maybe opens the door for other, maybe one would say competitors, but I think it's opportunity for the rest of where feedstock can end up down the rest of the value chain. So.
Great point. You shouted out Mike Rowe earlier. If you look at your operation, what's the dirtiest job that you have in your entire operation?
Oh, so we got out of the livestock industry probably 15 to 20 years ago. So that can't be it. But one of the dirtiest jobs on the farm is we've got a 600 bushel dump pit, a few of them, and cleaning that out, getting it ready for harvest after it's got rotten soybeans in it or rotten corn. Rotten soybeans is the worst. It can be at the bottom, but man, it can stick with you. So that's got to be the dirtiest job. And you're more than welcome. Hey, I'll hire you for a little bit more than minimum wage to come clean it out.
I think it'd be great fun. We'll
busy that day,
we'll
right?
No. I want to take that job on. But we could do that. We could get Mike Rowe to.
There you go.
Maybe he would do another special edition, the agricultural edition of the dirtiest jobs. I think he's had a few, but that would be a good one.
That's
that
a
would
tough
be a
one there.
really good one.
When he leaves Andy's place, I'll have him come down to our farm. We raise some cattle, have a feedlot, a cow-calf operation. There's nothing worse than trying to AI a group of cows off of fresh grass. It comes at you from every way, sideways and in between. Mike would have his hands full that full day with Andy and I.
Yeah, for sure.
I love it. Okay, back to business. Thanks for that insight.
I've got the scent of rotten soybeans in my nose right now just talking about it. So believe me, it's
lunchtime, so you can put that away. All right, I go one question, then we'll wrap it up. Jay, what do you see as the greatest opportunity for future collaboration in agriculture?
Yeah, before I get into the opportunities on monetizing, I think we have a big opportunity to lead by example in the market by listening to the customer and prove that collaboration does provide value and it can be done. If we can provide that value to the customer, I believe that there'll be others to follow. Andy mentioned at the beginning of this podcast that, building that trust. And, I believe if you do build that trust, opportunity will follow. It kind of ties back to what I'm sure we were all raised on is do what you say. And I think if you do what you say, you're going to create that trust and good things will ultimately happen. But getting back to the market side of things, I think there's some very near-term things. When you think of co-products coming out of the ethanol plants going to exports, I think shape files around that are already being asked about in the market. I think there's an opportunity there. But even the local markets, when you think about low CI beef, for example, and feeding your cattle low CI corn or whatever it is, it comes back always to the question, will the end user pay more for it? And we're not going to make that decision for them. We're going to have to sit and listen to the market and understand what they want and see if we can provide a solution to that. It could look a whole lot different than what we're talking about today around 45Z, but I do think this is where the market's going around the data itself, making the commodity more valuable. The commodity is always going to be valuable, but I think the data piece that goes along with it, if done right, is going to create a lot of value for everybody in the market.
Thanks, Jay. It's time to wrap it up, but I wanted to thank all of you for participating today and great insights. Look forward to hearing more and producing the work that's required to do the dirty job on Andy's farm. That'll be maybe a future podcast where we do it from the outside of the pit.
We're going to video that one.
Yeah, that would be a video podcast. I want to thank everybody for listening in today and welcome any suggestions. If you have any, if you've liked what you've heard today, like and repost this and give us some more publicity. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Jeff.
Appreciate it.